Here's the gospel reading from the Gospel of Luke, the 24th chapter. Jesus himself stood among the disciples and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified and thought they were seeing a ghost. Jesus said to them, "Why are you frightened? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, Jesus said to them, "Have you anything to eat? Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. Then Jesus said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the Scriptures, and he said to them, "Thus it is written, that the Messiah is to suffer and to rise from the dead, and on the third day rise again, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins is to be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things, the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ." So if Jesus showed up here and was among us, would we recognize him? As Christians, we often like to ask ourselves this kind of question, don't we? We were talking about this very thing at our high school Bible study this past Friday. We wondered if Jesus showed up and sat down with a cup of coffee at our table, would we know it was Jesus? And how would we react if we did? I kind of wonder, why do we ask ourselves those questions? Is it because we are trying to see ourselves in the stories of the Bible? Is it because we think we are at some kind of disadvantage, so to speak, compared to the people in the stories of the gospel who knew and saw Jesus every day? Is it because we are worried that we are going to miss Jesus when he really comes? I'm not really sure why we like those questions about recognizing and reacting to Jesus. But it does seem like these might be the same sorts of questions the disciples were asking themselves when Jesus showed up and was among them in this reading from Luke we've heard today. This was a surprising resurrection appearance by Jesus, and it caused the disciples to say, "Is this really Jesus? How do we react?" Now, my favorite line from the story is this one. While in their joy, they were disbelieving and still wondering. While in their joy, they were disbelieving and wondering. That was the disciples who responded to the risen Jesus appearing to them with a mix of joy and disbelief and wonder. Those are the reactions that are named, at least. There were probably more feelings, more emotions than that even. But joy, disbelieving, and wondering, well, that's a roller coaster of emotions enough. That first Easter must have certainly been a roller coaster for the disciples. The gospel readings we've heard today is really only part of the story. Part 3, in fact. In part 1 of Easter, according to the Gospel of Luke, some women went to the tomb early on the first day of the week, and there they found the stone had been rolled away. There were 2 men there in dazzling white who told them that Jesus was risen. And they left and told the rest of the disciples, who didn't really believe it. In part 2, later that same day, there were 2 travelers on the road to Emmaus, and though they did not recognize Jesus, Jesus began to walk along with them and to talk to them, and they who they did not recognize explained to them why the Messiah should have to suffer and rise. Later that evening, when they stopped to eat, suddenly their eyes were opened, and they saw that it was Jesus who had been with them all along. And so now it's part 3. Later that evening, our gospel story. The disciples were together and they were talking about these things that had happened. And all of a sudden, Jesus is there with them too. You see, there must have still been lots of confusion in the air when Jesus appeared. There were strange reports about Jesus being alive, but no understanding yet, no sense of what had really happened or what it all could mean. We sometimes tend to assume that Easter was Jesus is dead, Jesus is risen, yippee! But in reality, it was way more complicated than that. It was Jesus is dead, then the tomb was empty. What? What happened? He was raised. What? How could that be? We saw Jesus. We don't believe you. Look, here is Jesus. We still don't believe you. What is going on? Ah! And so the story says, the disciples, while in their joy, were disbelieving and wondering. That's my favorite line from the story because it feels so real, doesn't it? These weren't superheroes that Jesus appeared to, after all, that Easter day. They were real people who had real, all over the place reactions to the unfolding drama of the resurrection of Jesus. Do you think we can be real people in that way? Can we be real people? What I mean is, can we be a community where all these things are allowed? Joy and disbelief and wonder and all the things people experience. We are an Easter community, which means we are gathered around the risen Jesus. But if this gospel story is any guide, and I hope it is, then that means we must be a community that makes room for the roller coaster of Easter faith. Our staff here at Zion talks about this sort of thing from time to time. We talked about it just last week at our staff meeting, thinking about what it means to be a community of welcome. Like, who is welcome here? Is it just people who are like us? Those who look like us? Or believe like us? Or is there room for people who don't know what to believe? Sometimes I fear churches assume that church is for people who believe. That if someone walks through our doors, it means, well, their life must be all put together and they've got things all figured out and that church will be a part of it. We tend to assume people are, I don't go to church, then I do go to church, yippee! But what if for some people the reality is more confusing and more complicated than that? What if there is a lot more, how could that be? I don't know what to believe. What's going on here? Is there a place here for those kind of people? For those kind of real people? I think there is. But I think to be such a place, we would have to rethink our assumptions. We'd have to learn that not everyone knows what a church even is. We'd have to remember that not everyone who walks in our doors is here because they believe. We'd have to embrace new goals for ministry, not getting more good members, but rather being a community that welcomes joy and disbelief and wonder and invites people to come and be real and be all over the place. What I love about this story from Luke is that it's about real people. And it invites us to be real people and to welcome real people. People who have questions and doubts. People who wonder about Jesus and how to react to him. Maybe the question we should ask ourselves is, will we recognize those people when they come and are among us? And will we recognize the Christ who is present in them?